whether you're working on video games, commercials, feature films, we're essentially telling stories. Just like in real movies, we have our actors, we have our props, our sets, and we have our camera.
So all these things, what we do with the camera, what we do with the elements on the screen, what we do with our character, what we do with the animation, all these things together is the staging of a shot. We stage things so that the story is clear to an audience.
So a lot of things are involved in staging, from choice of camera angle you're using, what lenses are you using, how are you composing things around the screen in order to tell your story. So let's go one by one. What elements are involved in staging?
First, we have the elements, the characters or the props, sets, and the way they are positioned around the screen. Second, the camera, where is the placement of the camera, the angle of the camera, or even the lenses that are used in the camera. Third is the action, what's going on in the shot, what is a physical action that the character is doing, what is something going on with the props. Anything that goes on within the shot will affect the staging of the shot. Fourth, the idea. We should make sure that the audience only gets one idea at a time. We shouldn't confuse the audience, and staging is a big part of what the audience is getting out of a screen. And last and most important is the point of the shot. This is the main thing that has to be more than clear within the shot. Everything else should be secondary.
The one main thing about staging is clarity, is making sure our points are clear. And yeah, staging is it's a great thing. Staging. I love it. You love it. When starting to animate, or even if you're shooting a short film, whether it's animation or live action, it's very easy for people to get so impressed by the technology part. You see it in movies where people are putting special effects almost all over the place when you don't necessarily need it in all those occasions. And the same thing happens with animation. With animation, the moment that you know you can move the camera around, you can set keyframes on the camera, you can put explosions and effects and particles all over the place, people get crazy and people get too carried away in that direction as opposed to keeping things simple. That is a very, very important point, and that is something that I read about it a long time ago that just kind of like drill in my head, which is to not confuse the medium with the message. You want to always focus on the message, on what you are telling the audience, and you don't want to get stuck on the medium. So let's say that you are using a fancy renderer, you are using the latest technology, you are using the latest camera, you are doing the most ultra technological, advanced, whatever. In the end, it doesn't matter. In the end, what matters is what it is that you are telling an audience and what is your point. That's what matters in the end. All the technological advances and all the technological things you're using, renders, blah, 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 doesn't matter. It's, that comes and goes, just like with software, just like what we've been talking about software. The software, today we're learning, today you learn one software, tomorrow that software might be old. So you don't care about the software. What you do care is about what you are doing and what you are telling with the software, or what you are doing and what you're telling with the camera, or what you're doing and what you're telling with anything that you use in order to tell your story.
So shots, scenes, or sequences are concepts that sometimes get confused from one another. So let's break down these terms. A shot is a continuous view filmed with one camera without any kind of interruption. For example, this right here is one individual shot. Now the term shot should not be confused with the term take or cut. They are completely different things. One take or multiple takes are created in order to choose which one fits the best, so that that take will turn into a shot. So when you're talking about a cut, you are basically talking about how one shot relates to either the next one or the one before. A scene is a place or setting where the action is taking place. A scene can be one shot or series of shots showing a continuous event. A sequence is a series of scenes or shots complete in themselves. It can take place in a single setting or several settings. So this sequence or scene is made out of 3 individual shots and is taking place in one setting.
So after talking about all this, what we are going to be covering on this class mostly applies to shots. In later classes, we are going to be talking about things that apply to scenes and sequences, such as continuity, screen direction, visual design, cutting, more advanced composition. But in this class, we're only going to be talking stuff that only applies to shots and individual frames. How important is the camera when telling a story? Well, we cannot stress the importance of the camera enough.
A movie is made out of different shots. You are telling different things on different shots based on different story points. So the selection of the camera angles is one of the most important factors in making a movie and keeping the audience interested. Because of this, we have to have some sort of knowledge in order to create something that works and is clear for the audience. But because in animation the camera can be literally positioned anywhere, moved anywhere and animated any way we want, it's important that we understand why we place a camera, because we are eventually placing the audience and positioning their point of view.
There's a few things to keep in mind before we place the camera anywhere. We should know whose scene it is. Basically, we should know whose character the shot or the scene is about. If we have a conversation and one of the characters realizes something, we as an audience want to see this character's reaction. So when planning shots, we should know the importance of the characters throughout the scene to figure out when and where we will be placing the camera. The style of the shooting. This is basically knowing what kind of style are we going for when using the camera. Do we want tilted type of angles? Do we want fast camera moves or the slow camera moves to give the scene a slow pace, for example? The director or the animator working on a short film should know this in advance to keep the style of the scene or film consistent. Does the audience need to know the geography of the characters throughout the shot? Staging and where we place the camera will help let the audience know that this character will move from point A to point B. Therefore, the director will know why to place the camera here or there.
The camera is going to tell us how much area or space is included on the screen and the viewpoint from where the audience will watch the action or the event going on. So 3 factors determine the camera angle and its relationship with the audience. The subject size in relationship to the overall frame, the subject angle or the angle in which the character is in relation to the camera, and the camera height. The size of the image or the character on the screen is determined by the distance of the camera from the subject and is also determined by the focal length of the lenses used in the shot. We will cover basic lenses later, but what is important here that you remember is that both affect the subject size of the image. So let's go ahead with some shot definitions. Each cinematographer or director has slightly different definitions of framing and shot sizes. But these definitions are similar enough that we'll be able to talk about them in approximate terms. So we'll start out with extreme long shots. Used in the old Western films, for example, extreme long shots show a greater distance between the camera and the person or object. Long shot, or LS, this type of framing still shows considerable distance between the camera and the character or object. It might include a street, a room, or any setting where the event takes place. Sometimes it's used to establish all elements in the scene so that the audience knows which characters are involved and where they are located as they move around or as we cut to a closer shot. Generally, long shots are loosely composed to give room to the players to move around. Establishing shot is usually a type of framing between an extreme long shot and a long shot. It reveals where the scene is taking place. It also helps to orient the audience. An establishing shot doesn't necessarily have to be one specific kind of shot, but because we are establishing a location or a scene, usually extreme long shots or long shots work best. A full shot is a type of framing that usually covers a little more than the size of the character, whereas a medium full shot is usually a framing in between a full shot and a medium shot. We'll discuss later why this kind of framing is not so frequently used because of the composition and the feeling it creates. A medium shot describes the middle ground in between a long shot and a close-up. It shows a character from the waist up. Sometimes a medium close shot, which starts past the waist of a character, is used in conversation scenes. Like discussed earlier, this type of framing works best after a long shot or a full shot has been used. A two-shot is a medium shot that includes two characters on the screen. It's a great use of the medium shots as it leaves room for both characters to interact or have dialogue without making our audience too emotionally involved. In between a medium shot and a close-up shot, we find two types of framing, which are the medium close shots and close shots. As we enter the close-up areas, we find different types of frames. A wide close-up, which includes the head of the character and part of the shoulders. A close-up or full close-up right above the shoulders, also referred as a CU. A medium close-up covering the head and the neck. An extreme close-up, usually framing the face of the character. Close-ups help create a bigger sense of intimacy with the character, so that the audience is even more involved. It indicates maybe details on the character's feelings, thoughts, or emotions, or showing a special significance of the object being shown.
So sometimes it's good to frame things from a flat angle point of view, but framing things from a flat angle point of view is lacking depth. And depth is one of the biggest things in composition. Combining angles when shooting provides leaning angles in the screen, therefore giving us depth in the composition. Depth and perspective are actually very powerful tools when dealing with a 2D composition. We are able to see more sides of the objects. In some cases, some filmmakers actually frame the camera at an angle that is actually tilted. This is called a Dutch angle, and is employed to sometimes give a feeling of chaos, suspense, disorientation, discomfort in the viewer. It's one of the powerful things about staging. Sometimes just by what we do in the framing, we are subconsciously affecting the viewer in different ways. Lately, Dutch angles don't necessarily have that purpose only anymore. You can see a lot of Dutch angles being done on commercials, on MTV, a lot of TV shows. I guess to create, to give the content feel more unusual, more fresh, more original. Although sometimes using too much of that camera angle can become kind of distracting and original after a while. So it's good to balance things around.
Let's talk about the camera height. High and low angle shots can be chosen because of aesthetic, technical, or psychological reasons. They provide contrast, variety, and dramatic impact to the scene. Low angle shot is when the camera is down and or angle upward at the subject. It can be as low as the ground. Low angle shots could be used in a variety of ways. To give a status or importance to either a character, a prop, or an object in relation to other elements or characters in the scene. To increase subject height or intensify movement. To separate background and foreground subjects. To eliminate unneeded background elements. To drop the horizon line and vanishing point, or emphasize or increase compositional lines across the screen for perspective purposes. To intensify dramatic impact. The movie Citizen Kane has some great examples of low-angle shots based on story points and character relationships. High-angle shot is where the camera is higher on angle down towards the subject, and it makes the characters on the screen look smaller and insignificant. High-angle shots can also be used in a variety of ways. To establish the story or a scene, for a more artistic composition or to supply pictorial beauty, to view certain actions or the geography of the setting more clear, almost like a map, like a layout. Most sports or games employ high-angle shots to view an entire area as well as the characters. To establish a status among characters or players on a screen, or to influence the audience reaction to screen players.
If I show up at your door, chances are you did something to bring me there.
There are other kinds of shots that you guys are not necessarily going to be using it anytime soon, but it'll be good for you guys to know and to kind of like start to remember. One of them, for example, is an over-the-shoulder shot. For example, in conversations, you have the camera right behind one of the characters, so you see the back of the character, in between the head and the shoulder. But then the main point of that shot is to acknowledge that there are two characters on the screen, so you have a very clear shot of the character, but still we are acknowledging that there is two characters by having the shoulder and the back of the head of the other character. A reverse shot is if we have a conversation between two people. Again, we have the over-the-shoulder shot. A reverse shot will be the opposite shot to that, a point of view shot, or also called a POV. These are shots that recreate the perspective of a character, the point of view, what the character is looking at. They might incorporate things like camera movement or optical effects to make them even more believable. Do you want the camera to be moving, to be dynamic, or do you want the camera to be static, to just be still? The main thing which I keep repeating is, if you're going to move the camera, you have to ask yourself, why are you moving the camera? There's got to be a reason for moving the camera. Why? Because when you move the camera, you are actually reframing the shot. Sometimes reframing can be subtle, like someone standing up from a chair. But in other cases, reframing a shot and moving the camera can reveal a huge story point. So it's very important that we know exactly why are we moving the camera, and if we even need to move the camera at all. Some basic uses of camera moves could be like following a character, revealing something important, emphasizing a character's reaction, getting more personal or impersonal with the character, or even creating a sense of chaos and excitement. So some things to keep in mind when employing camera moves. Avoid a camera move that draws more attention to the actual camera move than to the subject itself. Like if I'm looking at a character and I'm very much into the character, and all of a sudden there's this big camera move, instantly I'm thinking, what happened to the camera? As opposed to being with the character. It's a fine balance. The viewer has to follow what's going on. So if you're using a camera that is very fast, the viewer is not going to know what the hell is going on. Also, let's say that you have a camera starting to follow a character in the screen. Don't start moving the camera first. I would actually have the character anticipate the move of the camera. So basically have the character start moving first, and that's giving a reason to the camera to start moving. There's different kinds of moving cameras. There's a pan shot, which is moving shots from side to side without changing the position of the axis of the camera. There's a tracking shot, which is a shot in which the camera tracks along with the characters, whether they're moving or they're in place. It can move forward or backward, sideways or around the subject. There's those shots called dolly, crane, boom shots. These are mounted cameras on cranes. A tilt shot is an upward or downward rotation of the camera. The effect of this rotation is kind of like a vertical up and down movement. So for composition and what you're doing with the characters on screen, actually lenses is going to be very important. We'll talk a little bit about it so that you get an idea of how the use of lenses can increase or decrease the dramatic effect of the animation. Camera lenses in live action is a piece of curved glass that focuses the light rays in order to form an image of film. So when talking about lenses, we're talking about the focal length. The focal length alters the perspective relations of an image. So it completely changes how close some characters might look on the screen or how far away the background is. So there's different kinds of lenses. At this point, we're only going to be dividing them into three main categories for lenses. Normal lenses, long lenses, which are more like the telephoto type of lenses, and short lenses, which are more like wide angles type of lenses. Short lenses, for example, are great if you're shooting full body stuff and you want the camera to be closer to the character. If you have lenses that are either 20 millimeters or 10 millimeters, things start to look more rounded, almost like a fisheye type of feel, and that actually can make the characters look very distorted. The shorter you get with the lens, the most distorted things start to look like. Shorter lenses, actually, you can see a lot more of the room. For example, this camera here uses a short lens. So then you can see a lot, and I can actually come closer to the camera. But the closer I come to the camera, the more distorted things look. Using shorter lenses can make the character seem less personal. For the most part, either normal lenses or long lenses start to make you feel more intimate. Now, telephoto lenses, on the other hand, it brings all the planes closer together, so it almost seems like there's not much space in between them. It creates the opposite effect to a wide angle, and also it doesn't distort things as much, which is great. Now, with long lenses, things become more intimate. The foreground characters are actually in focus while the background characters are out of focus. With short lenses, everything tends to be in focus, which is not necessarily good when you're trying to have the viewer look at specific parts of the screen. At this point, I will just stick with regular lenses, all the way from 35mm to 50mm. Staging in the end is all about composition. It's all about how to use all the elements on the screen to tell something to the audience. When you arrange the order of placements of either characters or objects in front of the camera, when you choose a certain location, you're composing a shot. You place certain elements in front of the camera one way or another in order to tell something to the audience. So when thinking about composition, we should ask ourselves constantly, what am I trying to say with this shot? What am I trying to say by putting the camera like here or there or here, or all these things? What am I trying to tell the audience by putting these characters around here and only one character in here, or putting a lot of characters closer to the camera and one tiny little guy all the way in the back? What am I trying to tell the audience? Keep on asking yourself these questions. Get used to asking yourself these questions, because then your whole film, your whole piece, your whole shot will have purpose. Otherwise, if you're just putting things here and there, and things will have no purpose at all. So the basic shape of what we look at in the screen, like the basic shape of the film screen or the TV screen, is key to film composition. And this is called the aspect ratio. Aspect ratio is basically the width and height of the film frame as it appears on the screen, whether it's a movie or a TV. Classic films such as Ccsition actually use what is called the Academy ratio of 1.33 to 1, and used by most films up until like the 1950s. The standard US widescreen ratio is 1.85 to 1. Certain films actually use a more extreme widescreen ratio, such as Rebel Without a Cause, which uses 2.35 to 1. Let's say that you guys are working on a short film. It's going to be very different if you're composing stuff thinking that your output is going to be just a TV screen, as opposed to, like, let's say that you're going to show it on a movie theater, where the aspect ratio is a lot different than that on the TV screen. One of the key things in staging and composition is actually designing. Under the dictionary, the word design uses the synonym to plan. So to design things, to compose things, when you are staging, you are actually planning things around. Artists arrange elements in a painting or in the screen in order to form a visual pattern. In the end, regardless of what elements are being arranged and how, the end result will always be a visual organization. Directors of photography and storyboarders are very, very familiar with composition, because in most cases, a good use of composition in a shot makes the storytelling stronger. A great exercise to start developing an eye for composition is to start going to museums, to see what works for you, what doesn't. How do people stage things? It doesn't matter if it's on a film or if it's on a painting. People are still staging things and composing things around. Apply it to your own work and don't feel limited or constrained. You often hear the phrase, there are no rules in art, and that's actually very true. Composition is an art, it's not a science. There's not really like definite law on how to do certain things. When it comes to design, there are certain design guidelines that will assist you and will not limit you in the creation of artworks. A lot of these guidelines from design are based on visual perception and how our brain works. Sometimes actually some of the most striking and dramatic shots come from breaking the rules, but done in a way that actually works. Not only feels different, but feels unique. So let's start out by talking about what are the elements that are involved in design and composition. So let's look at all the design elements in this painting done by a Spanish artist called Goya. We have lines going around the image. Sometimes these lines are invisible lines, sometimes they are lines done by characters looking at other characters, other times they are more obvious lines. Sometimes lines are used to emphasize a focal point within the image. And in design, actually, different lines have different purposes or different meanings. So, for example, straight lines show strength, masculinity. Soft lines, in the other hand, they show something feminine, delicate. So diagonals, they show action, they show speed, they show instability. Opposing lines, they show confrontation, danger, conflict. Line is a very important tool. Shapes, forms, and masks. In this paint, we notice that there is actually some shapes being formed. The grouping of these characters on the screen right and the lines being created by the placement of the characters also point at the main part of what we want to look at. Again, these are not obvious shapes or forms or masses being created around the screen, but instead it's more the overall feel of when you look at something really quick, what is the main thing that you look? Like if you're squinting your eyes, for example, what are the things that strike you about the painting? The main thing to remember from that is that whenever you look at a painting, whenever you look at a movie, there's what is called pictorial weight. Sometimes like several characters will form that, like if you have a crowd of people, it's not necessarily what each individual character is doing on the screen, but instead it's like what the overall crowd are doing around the screen, and that's what you remember right away. So you are grouping elements around the screen, and that's one of the very important design elements. Depth is a very important point. The illusion of space is a great design tool and compositional tool. What it is either by the use of size, the use of overlapping characters around the screen, the use of perspective, aerial perspective, things fading in the background, things in the foreground becoming darker or more contrast between them, the vanishing point. They start to give that screen, that 2D screen, a more depth. That's the illusion of space and depth are two extremely important tools when composing a picture, because now not only you are limited to what is going on in this in this type of space right here, but instead you are also starting to use depth. So depth is a very important point. Value and color are two other important composition and design tools that we can use to our advantage. By using different colors, we can lead the viewer's eyes to one part of the screen or another part of the screen. Some colors call our attention more than other colors. And going back to the painting, it's like our main character is very bright and it's mostly with white surrounding. Now all the other characters have darker colors. Why? Because we might not want to be looking at those colors as much. But it's important that we know that colors also help us in directing the viewer's eye. Value is another element in design that really help us know where to look at. Value in the brightness and the contrast of some characters. And then I'm going to add one more, which is mostly applies to cinematic composition, which is actually the time. Time and the change of images over time. Because like we talk about static composition and dynamic composition, in film and animation we have to keep in mind that whenever we have characters or things going around the screen, we're constantly changing the composition. So now we have time and the change of images as another element in design and composition. Timing applies to staging. Let's say that we have a shot and we have a lot of things going on the screen. We need time to read all those things. If we just have one simple thing going on, maybe we don't need that much time to stage that shot. So then we can cut into something else. But when we have a lot of things on the screen, we have, like us as viewers, we have to have time to be able to read what's going on the screen, or else we'll miss the point and we'll miss the idea and the whole thing will go to hell. So going back to the painting by Goya, there's a bunch of different things that help us direct our eyes to the main point of what the painting or the shot will be. So like in here, for example, we are looking at the central character of the screen for several reasons. Placement of the character is more towards the center, so instantly when we look at any painting, sometimes we look at the center of the screen. Also, you have some color changes and some lines being created that are actually very obvious here, and again this combined with the painting that is on the left, as well as combined by the side of the table that is going, it's all creating these lines that want us to look at the center of the screen. So there are tools that either help us direct the viewer's eye or help us create an all-around nice, pleasant composition to look at. Let's say that you're looking at a painting or you're looking at a shot. It's how all the parts within that shot or that painting are all working together in order to tell you something. There's different ways to give unity to a composition: by proximity, by repetition, or by continuation. So with proximity, you're basically putting elements feel more close together, as if they belong together. So by repetition, you're basically repeating elements around the screen that make the whole thing feel more unified. And you can repeat different things, where it's a color, you can repeat a texture, a direction, an angle. The important thing is that it all feels as part of one. And with continuation, things are arranged in a way that, like me looking at this piece, I'm going from one place to the other, so it all flows together from one element to the next element, and things are more organized. For example, when talking about proximity, you have like three characters in a conversation talking. Sometimes that creates like a triangular composition. So in cinematic terms, this can be translated in the sense that all the pieces in the screen must work to tell the story. If something on the screen is not helping the story, chances are you don't need it. And you're just basically overcrowding the screen with pieces of information that are either going to confuse the viewer or are not helping your story. In composition, emphasis or focal point is crucial in order to get the audience attention, to always having them looking here or there. So for paintings, what is the tools that the artists use? And one of them is actually a focal point, which is an area of emphasis where the artist wants the audience to look at when looking at their paintings. So with staging, it's important that we have an area of interest. This should be basically one. There should be only one thing going on at a time, and that applies to the actual animation, to the way we have the character working. It should also apply to the staging. If we have just like with animation, if we have a character doing a million things and they are all equally important, then we don't know where to look at. With staging, it's the same thing. If we have 2 or 3 or 4 areas of equal emphasis around the screen, then we miss the point. We miss the point of the shot. There should be only one point on each shot, or one thing that we are looking at a time. There can be like several things going on the screen, but there should be one that is of most importance for the story, and then all the other things going on around the screen. So let's say that there's other stuff moving, whatever. Those are called accents in paintings. But those things should always complement the main center of interest that is going on the screen. You can have like a character doing something on the foreground and then have a character doing something on the background. But whatever the main important part of the shot is, one or the other should not be interfering from that. we have like the foreground character saying something very interesting or important for the story, then the background character should complement to that character, whatever is going on. And the same applies with staging. If you have one piece of information being told on a screen, then other pieces of information that are being told on the screen should not interfere with that. So there's different ways of emphasizing something around the screen. By contrast, by contrasting some elements against other elements, by isolating some elements versus other elements. Like if you have one specific area that you want to look at, then you isolate it from other things going on around the screen. If you have one specific character that you want to be looking at, how can you have all the other things around the screen work with that? Do you have other characters around the screen looking at that particular character? Do you have that particular character in a brighter spot so that it's easier for our eye to look at that particular area? Also with depth of field. Depth of field is being used more and more and more on films. It's a very efficient way to lead our eye around the screen. If you have something that is out of focus, of course our eyes are not going to be staying in that spot for too long. Chances are our eyes will go from whatever is out of focus into whatever is in focus. Balance is the equal distribution of weight around the screen. So there are different ways to go about it. There is a formal or symmetrical balance where all things are equally distributed from a pictorial weight point of view. Compositionally speaking, it's not as interesting. From a staging point of view, it's not as strong. It can be kind of weak. It's usually left for things that are kind of like organized, things that are in peace, in control. Now, informal or asymmetrical balance is when things are actually composed or staged, so they feel more casual, they feel less planned, as if you are staging things completely. Things that are asymmetrically balanced or more informal balanced, they seem more interesting. So for example, close-ups. Close-ups tend to be more asymmetrically balanced than putting a close-up right in the center of a screen, which tends to look like more of a portrait. You just have a newscaster, somebody like telling the news. Today we're going to be talking about the weather. So you can balance things by value and by color. You can even balance things by texture or by the shape. From a cinematic point of view, you can balance things by the position of where the characters are at. So there's not that many things in film that are actually symmetrically balanced. For the most part, everything tends to be more asymmetrically balanced, which feels more interesting, feels more cinematic, and it makes me want to keep watching more and more. So you guys probably heard about the rule of thirds. This is just another way of talking about asymmetrical balance. The rule of thirds is basically when you divide the screen both horizontal and vertically in thirds. Where those lines cut each other, they encounter each other, those points are compositionally stronger than if you place things basically in the middle of the screen. So like let's say you have a telephone pole and it's right in the middle of the screen, it's not as strong and it tends to weaken the picture as if you put it a little bit on the side. It's the same thing with the horizon line. If you have like a shot of the sea, putting the sea right in the middle is compositionally weaker than putting it a little higher or a little lower, almost like dividing it on thirds. Now this doesn't mean that things have to be this way or that way, but it's true that our eye, as well as our visual perception, is more attracted to things that are asymmetric. So if you have a character in the middle of the screen, it doesn't seem as appealing, as strong as a character in the third. Usually when you shoot stuff or you're framing stuff, you are dealing with a character that is the foreground, and then everything else that is behind that character starts to be the negative space. So what you do with the negative space can actually affect the viewer from a psychological point of view. Let's look at some examples. Sometimes screen space almost plays another character. For example, if you have a lot of screen space in the front of a character or in the back of the character, in the front of the character it looks like something in front is about to happen to this character. Now let's put some space in the back of this character. It almost feels like something is going to happen to this character from the back. So as a tip, leaving a space in front or behind the character should be planned ahead of time. So for example, by framing the character this way, it almost seems like there's something wrong, there's something weird going on. Now this is not to say that you shouldn't frame things this way. Sometimes framing things this way or that way can actually give a feeling to the viewer.
If two actors are talking to one another, you always want to leave a space in the direction that the actor is looking at. So he'll be looking at that way, and so this will be your camera angle, and this will be the space right there. So and then when you cut to the other actor, it'll be the opposite way around. He'll be looking that way, and you'll have the space there. Now this is not the way it's not like a rule the way it should be done, because there are a lot of movies like in, for instance, what you showed me in Collateral, where he's looking like that, and this is the end of the frame, which creates really uneasy feeling. But that was also the purpose of the director, I think, in that film. You guys should watch Collateral.
Some good tips on screen space, how you frame the characters, would be actually leaving some headroom or leaving some feet room. So from a frame and screen space point of view, sometimes on a long shot, having the head of the character barely touching the top of the screen, or even having the framing cut the legs or joints, might not necessarily be the best idea, as it makes the characters feel as if they have their legs cut off. It doesn't feel as pleasant to look at. Same thing with contacting the feet in the bottom of the frame. It's not as forgiving as having some top screen space and bottom screen space. Now with medium shots, you also have to be careful on how much space you are giving. Too much space on top might make the picture look bottom heavy. It might almost feel like there's something that is going to happen on the top of the character's head. If you have too little or basically no space on top of the head, it almost feels very crowded. The picture feels crowded, as if the character is in a box and barely fits. On close-ups, it helps to give the character some breathing room, compositionally on close-ups. Otherwise, it will give the shot a claustrophobic feel to it. Depending on the story of the moment in the film, this might work or not. Like if we're getting really close onto the character, it's a good idea not to cut on the mouth area or the chin. Instead, the forehead area is a lot more forgiving about where to cut. I would like to end the class by showing two paintings of the same theme. Now, it's two different versions of the same theme. Now, they're staged differently. And by the way they're staged, the author is telling the viewer something completely different. It's almost like the author is giving their own take on the subject to the viewer and wanting the viewer to feel completely different from one painting to the other. Let's take a look at them. The first one is Ghirlandaio, and the theme is the Last Supper. In this composition, we see a lot of things. First, all the characters are closer to the bottom. This gives us a more stronger foundation, and it shows strength. Second, we have these two main arches that are equally distributed. By showing these symmetric forms, things are in balance. There's a strong base, having all the characters sitting more towards the bottom. There's visual gravity. And there's one simple focal point, which is represented by where the leaning lines of the two arches are pointing to, as well as this one particular area pointing at Jesus Christ right here. Also, other elements give us also that feel of peace, which are like, the birds, the plants. There is no striking colors. All the colors are very mellow. It's a very easy to watch piece. The author is Ghirlandaio, and this painting was done in 1480 in Florence. Now let's look at this other painting done by Emile Nolde in 1909, also in Florence. Now this is a completely different take on the Last Supper. All the characters are crammed in the top of the screen, almost as if they cannot fit in it. including Jesus Christ. They're all at the top of the frame. Then the quality of the line is very rough. The colors are really, really bright, almost too bright. And then some of them have this greenish quality that it's giving me a very uneasy feel. It's almost like a claustrophobic vision on The Last Supper. That's the difference between one author and the other one. On one, by the way things are staged, is giving the viewer a more peaceful feel to it. And then on this one, on the other hand, is by the way the characters are so staged, very cramped together, and also by the quality of the lines, it almost feels very claustrophobic, very uncomfortable. So that's the power of staging. Just by the way we stage things, we can say one thing or a whole different thing to the viewer. Whatever you're doing with the camera, whatever you're doing with the elements on the screen, props, sets, whatever you're doing with the character animation, the position of where you have your character at, and the placement in relation to the camera, all those things, what you want to tell the audience, it has to be clear. That's the number one goal, just like with posing, just like with animation in general. The main thing is that people know exactly what you're trying to tell them, and to take advantage of the camera and take advantage of the elements on the screen and the composition to be able to tell a good story and to tell it clear. So, and vice versa. Losing a lot of stuff that yes, but basically staging, what the hell?